Great. Okay, I'll give you a little intro then.
Cool, thank you.
Do we have anyone that's filtering in the lobby? Should we give it a few minutes or just... Okay. Yep. Hey everyone, we'll kick it off in just a minute or two.
All right, announcements made.
Cool beans.
And I'm in the mirrored room and I can see you guys both and hear you, so, or I can hear you, Sal. So I think you guys are
Great.
good. I think you guys are good to roll.
Okay. So, hi everyone. Welcome to the final session of the AVAR conference and the tutorials and workshops track. I am here just to introduce our first speaker here, who is Andrew Champlin from HTC Creative Labs. Andrew's going to be giving a presentation about UI and UX across realities, creating the sound design of the Vive Lens. And without wanting to spoil his wonderful presentation, I will invite him up to, give us that hour lecture. We do have another presenter at 3 o'clock as well, so hopefully there'll be a few minutes for questions at the end, but we'll all be in the foyer after these sessions if we do run out of time. So save up all of your questions. All right, everyone. Here's Andrew.
Thank you, Sally. So this is UX sound design across reality. This is a panel where we'll be looking at the Vive Reality system, which is the front-end UI that shipped on the HTC Cosmos modular HMD last year, and use it really as a case study to examine human-centered design for sound design, and give you some strategies to maybe deploy that in your products if you're working at a smaller dynamic design organization in VR. Before we get to all that, since this is the last session of the first in VR AVAR conference, I want to thank Matt, Lawrence, our workshop chair Sally, Dustin and all the volunteers, really everyone at AES and DigiPen. Yes, emojis, please, let the emojis fly. That made this a reality, and as an unintended side effect, made obsolete, at least for me, in-person conferences for quite a while. I mean, for as many technical problems as we've had in alt space, I've still found it more pleasant and easy to navigate than most major US convention cities. Looking at you, San Francisco and Moscone Center. So special shouts out to you watching on the AltSpace desktop client. I envy your easy access to beverages. Anyone like me who is in VR working up a really good flop sweat, just know that you are accurately simulating the sort of woozy, hungover day 3 AES feeling. I've been there. Put on a VR headset. You can get that verisimilitude all on your own. Special shouts out to those watching on our YouTube live stream, and a very special shouts out to 2 viewers in Western Arkansas, Betsy and Jeff Champlin. That's my mom and dad. Even though we didn't get our act together as a country for college football to not be canceled, go Hogs, go. Anyway, so with those out of the way, I'm Andrew Champlin. I've been lucky for the past 6 years to work at a place called HTC Creative Labs. If you're unfamiliar, the joke I usually go to in these circles, sound designers know, We don't make sound cards. We are the company inside of the company of HTC that is responsible for innovation and ideating on new products. So that's everything from user research, user experience design, visual, of course, sound design, everything it takes to bring a product from the first ideation all the way to the mass market. A lot of the creative DNA that started Creative Labs is still with us. Drew and Dave are VP and Executive Creative Directors. If you like using your mobile phone, you have them to thank for a large part of it because they designed and deployed Sense, which was the first really successful front-end UI for Android on our mobile handsets in the 2010s and mid-2000s. And it's that same sort of focus on human-centric design that we tried to carry over into our in-VR products as we became a VR first and not a mobile first studio. So in that spirit, I want to go ahead and say that though I work with a lot of them, and despite the title of this talk, I am not a UX designer and make no pretensions to being one. The reason that I say that is because, getting a cue to bump my microphone volume. All right, can everybody hear me? Perfect. The reason that I make pains to say that is because before I gave up honest living for a career in audio, I was a circulation assistant at a library. And the work that I saw my reference librarian colleague Steve there is much closer to what I understand user experience design to be now than anything I've been asked to do in audio. User experience designers, like librarians, evaluate and organize information and present it in differing architectures or hierarchies. When executed correctly, what they deliver is nothing less invisible yet omnipresent than the Dewey Decimal System. It's a texture, a feeling, the sense of an unseen hand or organizational principle guiding you. UX designers primarily design the trust between a device and a human being, hence human-centric design. So as audio professionals, we know well enough that sound design is not that for everything that it is. But as people who love sound, you probably recognize some of the words that I used, texture, feeling, as being fairly similar to the endpoints of a successful sound design. And in VR, sound design and user experience design are brought a lot closer for a number of things, a number of reasons that we'll talk about than in sort of compatible fields like games, mobile, web, and linear media, where you might never expect a user experience designer to see a WAV file or for a sound designer to see a wireframe. That's because in VR design, a sound designer is 7 or 8 individuals all in one. They might be a sound effects editor and implementer. They might be a dialogue recordist or a music composer, editor, or supervisor, audio integrator, audio programmer, and that's a not comprehensive list. So over the course of this talk, I'm going to collapse all of those roles into a term that we'll see if it sticks around after this hour of UX sound designer. Somebody working as closely as possible to the needs of the user, using their toolbox of sound design to help engineer and design that trust. But before all that, we're going to do a video demo that we'll refer back to over the course of the presentation. If you are on the desktop client for AltSpace VR, maybe tab over to your browser to the AVAR Workshops YouTube stream where it'll be a little more reliable. If you're in VR, buddy, you're flying coach. You pays your money, you takes your chance. But don't worry if you don't see this video, as has been the case sometimes. I will be violating the storytelling rule and telling much more than I'm showing. In fact, I'll describe everything you're about to see right before you see it. So the Vive Reality system that you'll see demoed in this video is more than the front-end UI of the lens, which of course it is nothing less than, but it's really more of a kind of embodiment of what it means to move between experiences, effectively move between realities as a user, casting the user less as just a simple user of the product and more as a protagonist. So that necessitated a place, an origin to journey away from and journey back towards. So there was a lot of environmental sound design that needed to be done in this home space of origin. So you'll hear that at first. You'll hear the narration by our lovely host character, DB Cooper, which we translated into 16 different languages. You'll hear a lot of crisp interaction sounds for the onboarding, because the audience for this product was, of course, new to the Cosmos, which was brand new as of last year, and hopefully new to VR. We were trying to get a broad audience as possible. Then you'll see a lot of the interaction with the UI modules in the lens, which is the front-end UI, and that'll close with a brief tutorial. So I'll advance, and I'll meet you on the other side.
Welcome to Vive Origin, the first of many worlds you'll discover. Hope you didn't have any trouble finding the place. Before you venture off, let's go over some basics. Now, let's talk about the controllers. You'll use these to interact with the world around you. Let's try them now. Press each of the highlighted buttons you see. You got it! Using your index fingers, pull the triggers and bumpers. Excellent! With your middle fingers, squeeze the grips. Perfect! Each of these controls will function differently in different worlds, but you get the general idea. Now, try moving the joysticks around with your thumb. Press the joystick until you feel it click. Good job! The Vive button can be used to toggle the lens on or off wherever you go in Vive Reality. Let's try them now. You can use your lens to discover other worlds, travel to them, access tools, and other useful features. Point your controller at the lens and use the joystick to scroll up and down.
Okay, so everything you saw in that video, the music, the environmental sound design, the dialogue recording and processing, and the translation into multiple languages, and the engineering that made it possible, passed through my tiny studio at HTC Creative Labs. So I'm going to talk about in the course of this presentation how we got to being able to manage something relatively complex with a very low overhead of one sound designer. Of course, we had a mission-critical assist after we shipped by my friend Megan Fraser, who's here, making alternate soundscapes for the Vista launcher, which we'll show later. But the primary work for engineering and design on all of the sound was one sound designer. So we'll talk about some of the groundwork projects and concepts that led up to that. Once we get into the meat of the presentation, there'll be the strategy on a technical level for you as a UX sound designer, using the lens as a sort of retrospective study, the challenges and successes that we had there. And then I'll talk in summary about this UX sound model that we're hoping to develop. This idea that your impact, what you expect to do as a sound designer, the things you're able to get out of a DAW, your ability to reinforce the brand, everything that we've been conditioned to use as metrics for success up to this point is really just the beginning of making human-centric sound design, that you need persistence and agreement in VR between what you see and what you hear, that's spatial coherence, as well as a commitment to texture, the engineering and last 10 feet of making sure there's a repeatable, reliable, human-centric design in your project through sound. And we'll get to all that in a minute, because we're going to go over a definition of terms real quick. So as I said, I'm not a UX designer, and some of these definitions to a UX designer will seem remedial, but I want to go ahead and run over them just so we have a baseline of what I'm talking about when I say these things throughout the course of the presentation. So user experience and sound are two disciplines in immersive media that are different but are being brought together by a number of factors, among them predictable headphone use, smaller teams, and the novel interaction types that VR has. That means it's kind of inescapable that as a sound designer, you're going to have to create new interactions for this reliable endpoint. And as a user experience designer, you're going to have to factor in what these sounds are going to fit into your wireframes. But what is a user experience designer besides the evocative terms I've used up till now? Simply, a user experience designer is responsible for designing a person's experience interacting with a company or its services. In the 20th century, it's usually, or sorry, in 2020, it's usually taken to mean the role of an organization to provide easy and intuitive ways for people to use its digital services. I have a lot of friends that are in expo design or in sort of like embodied 3D UX design, who I would consider some of the best UX designers I know because they use wayfinding and signs to literally modulate people's relationship with space. But when UX design is often invoked now, it's usually meaning something flat or digital. Then two words that are very meaningful independently but mean almost nothing next to each other. Sound design, of course. We are all sound designers here, but none of us is because we all have our unique relationship to audio, things we like to do, things we love about it. In the context of this presentation, though, when I say sound design, I mean the total arrangement of audio, including non-periodic, which is to say sound effects-based, musical and vocal sound, in a piece of media, interactive media in this case. Sometimes, and it's an interesting side note, sound design, as people get more literate about what it means, it's taken to mean the special DSP processed effects in a track, as distinct from the melody or lyrics in a song or in the soundtrack in a movie. Think artists like Billie Eilish, Vince Staples in his Big Fish era, people like 100 gecs and Sophie. These are all artists for whom the signal processing and sound design as a special effect is as important as the melody. But for now, we're operating with definition 1. And then UX terms and a couple sound design terms that we'll sprint through. I didn't really know these until I looked them up for this presentation. I hear them around my office all the time. So we're going to start with the most used term in user experience, which is affordance, which is more or less just what an object or device allows you to do, the opportunity it affords you, a human being, to extend your skill set beyond your human capabilities. So the classic example is a tea kettle. It affords you the ability to transform some dry leaves and some boiling water into delicious Darjeeling tea. Not something you can do with your hands, or at least not something I can do with my hands. A signifier is usually used interchangeably with affordance, or sometimes is, but it just basically means an outward indication of what a device can do. So again, in the classic example, the signifiers on the kettle are the, see if I can do this in VR, the handle over here and the spout over here gives you a pretty good indication of where your hand should go and where your cup should go. So that's a signifier of an affordance. Wireframe is a word you'll see a lot and something you'll see infrequently when you start out in UX sound, but you'll encounter more and more and you need to learn how to work with. It's basically just any artifact that a UX designer makes beyond them just talking to communicate function. Most often it looks very essentialist, kind of function over form pattern drawing, but increasingly it can be volumetric or in VR. Wireframes are not uncommon these days, but usually it's taken to mean just something where a person is shown interacting with an interface or device and all of the various steps that are hard to express through language. And to that end, that person in that wireframe is usually a persona. A persona is kind of where user experience shades into user research. It is a research-based stand-in for a person. It's kind of a composite of traits, affinities. Usually this person is given a name, a job, things they like, things they don't like. And they're just a narrative device to build empathy in early design. And empathy, as we'll talk about, is probably the most important tool in human-centric design. Some terms we've heard throughout the con, of course, spatialization in audio just means anything beyond left, right, and distance-based attenuation to externalize a sound. This is used with HRTF, which is the head-related transfer function. Pretty much all of the things that go into making sounds externalized to the ear, a single human ear, which is usually duplicated because, of course, human beings, bilateral symmetry. Ambisonics is a multi-channel audio format that is speaker independent. In VR, it usually down mixes to stereo. And that means that we can do interesting things like in Google Resonance, we can take ambisonics of all of the point sources in the scene. This is also true with our internal Vive3 DSP. Turn these point sources into higher order ambisonics and then apply just one HRTF to the listener, which makes a very efficient kind of spatialization protocol for your VR experiences. And we'll talk about how those work with user experience design and less how they work in terms of externalization and accuracy. Procedural. This is a term that I'm using fairly fast and loose. I just use it to mean sound or music that is recomposed at runtime out of other smaller elements. There are probably people at this convention who are familiar with more advanced forms like cellular automata or algorithmic composition. That's not what we're doing here. We have a fairly low overhead. So we're just using a procedural generation engine to extend our sound design beyond what we can make in these tight timelines. Okay, so let's begin. Let's start back in 2014 when I was hired at Creative Labs as a junior ringtone composer. This was a job in 2014, and this was not a job that I was especially well suited for, at least in the beginning. If you, like me, are presented with a brand guideline and instead try to find a way to backdoor your love of 90s drum and bass onto as many handsets as possible, you might not be an especially good steward of a beloved smartphone brand. Thankfully, my boss at the time was very good at reining in my more fanciful instincts and keeping the brand language in the main channel relatively clean, while at the same time carving out places for me to express myself and learn the ropes in other less brand essential areas. He taught me how mobile sound design works from the ground up, how ringtones, alarms, and notifications dialogue with the other static brand assets on a phone like wallpaper and icons. He taught me how motion design and audio feedback work in mobile, and most importantly, he taught me how things in the industrial design of handsets, the speaker placement and housing, resonant frequencies, membrane distortion, that these things were just as important to think about when delivering for a predictable endpoint as melody, timbre, and brand. So over the course of 2 years and about 300 assets delivered, again, about 200 of them quarantined safely over here so the brand language wasn't too closely associated with the crazy things I was cooking up. Looks like my right controller died. Let's see, let me go ahead and switch the batteries real quick while I talk about that. So over the course of those 2 years, I struggled to really identify with the chain of command that most of my visual colleagues, engineering colleagues, and certainly UX colleagues were answering to, which was user experience design. I didn't really understand how wireframes, flat on the page, inert as far as I could tell, and not really animating or interactive at all, related to sound design as I understood it classically in the film sense post-production world. These wireframes were assets that didn't necessarily need sounds, and by the time they did, people were typically asking me for sounds that had already been completed to expedite the prototyping of these wireframes to an experience. And both of these things basically represented a short-circuiting of the experience of sound design as I understood it up to that point. How could I compose sounds for something that didn't exist? A bridge to understand that came later. Got the batteries loaded. When we started a collaboration with Under Armour on the connected health system called the Health Box. During this design process, I was responsible for the sound effects on the scale, the connected smart scale, that made a sort of sound every time it successfully weighed you, every time the setup process began, and most crucially, when the setup process encountered errors. This introduced a lot of problems and constraints that simply weren't true in flagship sound design for mobile, namely very small acoustic drivers that sounded like a monster talking into a walkie-talkie underwater, as well as the need to convert all sounds into hex for the 4 bits of dynamic range that I had, and a very defined brand language in Under Armour that consisted of percussive tones that were simply impossible to render on such a device. And so after a number of fairly unsuccessful and unsatisfying rounds of review with the leadership team at Under Armour in Texas, I was approached by a UX designer on the project, Shauna, who told me to, instead of considering ways in which I could backdoor brand affiliation on this very tiny and unsatisfactory device, to instead think of the person that these sounds were for in the first place. This is somebody who needs feedback beyond what the OLED screen can give them. Maybe it's somebody who's vision impaired, someone for whom leaning over is not a necessarily trivial investment of effort. The device should understand and respect those capabilities of the person that is using it. And this kind of goes to the wonderful presentation that Poppy, the scientist at Dolby, had this morning, where you think about empathetic technological design. Not everybody who uses a connected scale is necessarily a 20-something fitness influencer with a flawless hip hinge. You should engineer and design that trust for all people that are using your products. And this entirely reframed the problem for me. Instead of trying to squeeze these brand-affiliated percussive sounds onto the driver, it became a process of engineering that trust with sound. And it led to the ultimate solution, which was to take those percussive sounds, those standard attention getters of the mobile domain, and kind of transpose them into a tool called ENA-GRM Evolution, which, if you're not familiar, is something that can decompose a sound into its harmonic and non-periodic partials and gives you the ability to really tune through frequency and pitch shifting against the capabilities first of the driver, but most importantly of the human equal loudness curve. Again, I only have 4 bits of dynamic range to play with here. So when I'm putting sounds in a hierarchy, I'm placing them against what people are able to hear off of this very small sound source. So by putting human-centric design in the center, we arrived at a satisfactory conclusion. And that, again, was the spirit that we tried to take into our first halting steps of VR design. So this was 2016. I started as a VR sound designer. Our first product was something called Vive Home, and this was something with a very low spatial budget. This was our first attempt as a studio to engineer something in VR. Neither myself nor my boss at the time had ever used a commercial game engine. I think at one point in 2004, I'd used the Russian crack of RPG Maker. With a quick shout out to my colleague Addie, who got their start on WireWare DIY. There's any number of non-conventional ways to get started in this industry. But not knowing the workflow of Unity and the emerging standards of VR led to charming scenarios like line developer Albert removing all of our sounds, a month's worth of effort, about 10 minutes before an executive review, because my boss and I had forgotten to compress them the right way. But that same engineer and a lot of the other sort of very thoughtful and patient people working on Vive software in the early stages were kind enough to sit down with me and really run me through not only the onboarding onto VR and the Unity pipeline, but also the technical side of C# scripting and implementing. And over time, I became the kind of technical liaison and technical sound designer for our entire product portfolio in VR. In the case of Vive Home, I was working on the way to get in between the home space and the commercial sort of storefront called Vive Port via Vive Portal. You may be sensing a certain trend in our brand language here. This was imagined as a kind of portal in between worlds that really sat flush with the world in a way that's really kind of cool, and I haven't seen done in VR really since, because we've probably advanced beyond how crude we were able to represent the portal. This was Prey. Think Prey and not Portal in terms of how this is represented. Very little bezel, a lot of parallaxing, really kind of striking to see for the first time in commercial VR. So as I said, I blew my entire spatial budget on this portal. I put 3 layers of sort of volumetrically spatialized sounds, including 2 sort of absinthe growls that were on this rotation script, a couple of concentric suction sounds, and a worldized version of the 2-chord vamp that existed in Vive ports that played when you got very close, kind of giving you an indication of what this portal would do for you. And I didn't really understand why I did it at the time, but looking back, I knew that I was creating a signifier of an affordance. This spatial audio wasn't simply adding to the verisimilitude or the realism of the space. It was telling you what a novel technology that you were encountering for the first time could do for you, a human being, human-centric design. This continues through our first shipped video player, Vive Video. This was based on a super fast 360 and stereoscopic codec that one of our engineers, Shen, a literal rocket scientist that works with us that we're very happy to have. So this was something that he had developed basically in his spare time, and we spun up a full volumetric video player around it. Our environmental artist, Blake, made a space that is still one of my favorites. It was this retro-futuristic, very acoustically live-looking tiled space. I knew that anything I created in terms of ambience would have the benefit of this visual signifier of early reflections and reverb. But what I really liked about a theater space with this level of fidelity is that it gave me the opportunity to build on some of the assumptions of the media literate audience that we had at the time, at that point on the VR adoption curve. anyone who goes into a theater has some expectation of multi-channel audio. It's not only an expectation, it is a certified signifier of a high-end theater space. All of the Atmos and DTSs of the world, these exist out of sight, but are basically taken for granted by some segment of the media audience. So I worked with Shen to develop a 4-channel decoder scriptable object in Unity that would take in a quadraphonic mix and put it world-locked in a quadraphonic stereo position. It was a really cool plugin. We could use a single slider to adjust the equidistance between these emitters so that my 4-channel mix in the DAW sounded the same as it did in the actual implementation. And this, again, is a signifier of what the space is able to do. It's a little bit abstracted. It's one level up. It signifies what this space feels like and means to you as a media-rich, savvy consumer of VR content, but it is spatialization as signifier. And so by this point, we have reorganized. I am the only sound designer left on the team. We've taken on our executive producer, Jake, which is allowing us to do much more complex projects through very novel things like daily stand-ups and people in different organizations talking to each other. And we're attempting to re-envision Viveport VR. And this is our first example and our first sort of bridge to Vive Reality System in terms of human-centric sound design. So looking at the space, we have a dais here in the lower third where the user sits and browses content, which lives here in the middle distance. We have our 10-foot UI. That is kind of volumetric and has this added feature of being in VR, sort of taking over the entire vista when you enter into what's called a VR preview. So the decisions you make in the middle distance can have pretty vast consequences for what you're seeing all around you. And then we have this media player in the back. That's the farthest thing away. It also contains some ancillary information for the user, things like user reviews and technical specifications, as well as trailers that are supplied to us by our Viveport partners. And so when I started looking at this space, I knew that I was designing not only for static UI, as we had in the past, but for volumetric UI that was extending past the standard XY plane that people were used to and into the Z depth. This adds an entirely new dimension, and one that can't really be affected, at least could not at that point be affected with just HRTF and binauralization, externalization of sounds alone. I started thinking in terms of how we manage space on the mix stage in 2-channel mixing, and how I could create an information architecture just using the way that things were organized in space, kind of dialoguing with the sound design practice that I'd worked to up to that point. So you can see here in the near distance, this is where direct UI exists, much as it does for you in AltSpace VR here. It's kind of spread out pretty broadly on the x-axis. That's one of the central things in UX design. Things that are bigger and closer are more important to things that are smaller and farther away. For those, since they did span so much real estate on the x-axis, I did include an HRTF effect. It was pretty remedial. I think at that point we were using the Unity native spatializer. It was really more for a psychoacoustic, just noticeable difference between that and the UI interactions that occurred in the middle distance. If you look at the middle distance, that's our 10-foot UI interactions. That's where, if you think of reverb as having 2 components, I wanted the early reflections rather than the pure reverberation to live. So you had a lot of direct sounds that were very closely mic'd and dry, but in those same sounds, mixed to stereo, you had a kind of reverb sweetening that existed more in the kind of room modeling and early reflections. Nothing is happening really necessarily in real time. I think there's a light Unity reverb zone for the tail, but since you're always focused forward and the sort of expectation is that you're looking at the UI as it dominates your whole field of view, any advanced spatialization is really not the priority here. We're just trying to communicate space more than we're trying to communicate absolute location. And in addition to that, since this was a fairly space-aged and futuristic view of how UI interactions work, I included additional kind of spatializing effects, if you consider a resonator a very small space for those very direct close mic interactions. And in the distance space, we have the media center, which plays the trailers from our partners. Those are direct injection stereo. They have a little bit of wet dry mix on them, about 8% wet, so it rings out in the space but doesn't compromise the intent of the sound designers working on those trailers. But we also have a special feature that I developed for navigating the middle distance, which is a procedural music generation engine following species counterpoint rules of voice leading. As you navigate through the UI, you are actively composing a piece of music that lives in the distance, in reflections, in echoes. You're impact on the world is not just taking over the VR space with the content you're browsing, but actually giving shape to the soundscape. And this was a way that I thought that we could breadcrumb trail an interaction, keep the human agency at the center, and use a little bit of humanity through music, and more importantly, recognizable, coherent music that is composed live. And that's kind of where we enter into the Vive Reality system. This is the most complex project that we've taken on to date. We'd gotten another producer at that point, Heather. At some point, our dev manager, Alberto, enters the picture, and it's really all systems go on this complete reimagining of not just the retail space, but the entire experience of navigating VR on Vive headsets. And it's at this point where we'll get fairly technical in terms of what you should do in fairly absolute terms to be successful as an individual contributor on a project like this. And it's important to remember that you are not your job title. When you're operating in this kind of space, you not only need to be able to extend beyond what you understand sound design to be in a fairly narrow field, but also be literate in what all of your teammates are doing to be able to communicate with them, because the sound design, of course, doesn't stop when you hit bounce. You have to follow it all the way through to completion. So understanding that as we talk about these fairly technical, strategic ways to approach this problem, remember first that this is all in service of successful human-centric design. And secondly, you are not limited to your title as sound designer. You have to, in fact, reach far beyond that to be successful. And we start, of course, inductively with the biggest and, for me, hardest part. I get better at last-minute Git commits. I get better at navigating the complicated politics of an organization across 2 continents and many different disciplines. But the problem of the blank canvas, for me, never gets any easier. So if you're like that, here's a couple of strategies for a large UX project that you could maybe take with you to navigate the terror of the vacuum. Early on in any project like this, you will have UX storytelling. Before wireframes are actually made, the people that are responsible for designing the user experience are thinking through the user journey. And in addition to the panels and beautiful 3D art that we have here designed by our principal 3D UX designer, Matt, we had a UX designer, Ryan Gerber. I say his full name because he has a Kickstarter out now. Google Ryan Gerber plus Quest and go fund that man. We had a UX designer, Ryan Gerber, who was really taking a much more holistic view of how this lens fit into a kind of archetypal storytelling Joseph Campbell hero's journey. You navigate away from home, you return to it, as we said in the beginning. That origin is not simply window dressing, but an essential component of how we cast the user as the protagonist. And so those kind of very big emotional terms gave shape to my early sound design explorations for not only the environment and the kind of environmental feel, but also the UI. What does it mean to hear a sound that is comforting? What does it mean to encounter a desirable difficulty? To, if you're playing a game, do something that's a little bit difficult that you're returning back home enriched feeling. And so when your UX designers, if you're in a UX organization, are in their kind of wild-eyed, wired, mid-90s techno-hippie phase of storytelling, listen to them, because they may provide you valuable grist for the mill to get started on your sound design. Past that, we have a executive creative director, Dave, who is constantly ginning up motion design, motion reference, full walkthroughs, 15-minute into the future videos, not only for conventions like CES and MWC, but also just kind of in his spare time, probably right now this very minute. He's got a complete render sitting somewhere on an After Effects pipeline that I could add sound to if I wanted. And that's a great opportunity not only to add value across your organization, but also to kind of visualize this UI or audioize, to audiate your UI in a kind of stakes-free implementation area where you can use all the expensive reverb you want. You can position it in the stereo sound field exactly the way you would. You're not constrained by any of the overhead that is imposed by multiplying 2 screens at 90 frames per second. You can really just kind of kick the tires on your original idea that came out of the UX storytelling. So definitely look for ways, if you have creative leadership, to add value to that. If you don't, you can still work with yourself. There are a bunch of videos on my photo booth on my Mac of me just holding up one hand here representing UI, another hand here represents raycast, just something for sync. Literally anything to get you started at this point is better than the void. And look towards your contemporary projects. If you're in a design organization and you're making sound, there's probably, again, 1 or 2 of you, maybe 3 at the most. So you're probably working across the organization on a bunch of different projects. In the case of Lens, David, who works at Two Bears, was requesting some assets for a telecommunications software called Sync. And that David, being kind of the games industry, had a very crisp, clean, deliverable strategy, just an Excel spreadsheet where I was delivering stereo files normalized to 0 dB. That's one step removed from working in linear, but isn't as comprehensive as following user experience from the beginning to the last 10 feet. So that was kind of a lower stakes way for me to see how these sounds played in an experience and check in on it periodically, rather than something like Lens, for which I'm pushing daily. I have source control access. I really own the sound design there. If you're a contractor, just use other projects that are lower stakes as you're working on a larger UX project to see how you are working right now, what you as a sound designer, divided from you as a creative director for yourself and you as an audio integrator, all the various yous. This is just an organic way to separate them out and make the process easier. So building on some of the things we were talking about at Viveport, that second point there, the ideas that I had for volumetric UI were actually kind of converging with some of the thinking that was coming out of visual design in terms of how to represent visually what things are in different zones on the z-axis. And so some of that thinking coming together kind of through serendipity with John Cusack was a great way for both of those disciplines to kind of merge early on. Remember, visual design and UX design are not the same thing. And so getting that fidelity of sound following visual design early on, your user will not experience visuals and sound separately. So the earlier you get integrated with visual design and UX, so much the better. We had a lot of prototypes early on where we had UI navigating through the Z-depth, being subject to things like atmospheric perspective, legibility, and type ramps for visuals that were going to be in the lens ultimately. And I was able to show at the same time how sounds were affected to the atmospheric perspectives of the sound world, what things sounded like in early reflections, how we could gain stage effectively, what sounds could be used for transition, ADSR, all of these techniques that are fairly abstruse to the creative leadership that you have, married to visual, are much more clear. And then early in the creative direction, setting expectations with research and development, as I said, at Creative Labs, and to echo some of the things coming out of the Valve panel yesterday, we don't use middleware. We're primarily trying to empower the sound designers to work with engineers and the engineers to be sound literate. And it's also the case that we have a launch application that needs a lot of optimization. So for example, a lot of the random containers that we made for environmental emitters are very, very heavily optimized against that purpose. So that's an expectation that I set with the people really just over time because they could see all of my commit messages in Git. They could see that all of the scripts that were in our shipping products had come out of our studio, and in particular come out of the Sound Labs. This was a way that we just set expectations not only for engineers, but also for the people that are managing the PM and the production side, that you own the sound pipeline, and whatever that means for you doesn't necessarily mean learning how to code. You could also just become a relentless documentarian using video, using wireframes, taking those techniques from user experience design yourself, and using them to get across your intent as early as possible. So for something like Lens, as you could tell from the video, as well as the idea that it had a more narrative focus, but in every human-centric sort of design project, you're looking at narrative design just as often as you're looking at the visual or UX design in the abstract. In the case of Lens, we had a writer on staff, which was very helpful. Susan, our writer, was able to take these kind of crazy big picture ideas that Ryan was gestating in the early parts of the project and marry it to the brand standards and the brand voice and create a coherent story that not only was helpful in designing the environments and designing the sounds, but also when we're creating a script side for an actor that has to be translated into 16 different languages, having a very crisp and concise character definition for the host. The definition I believe that Susan came up with was a transgalactic Airbnb host robot that is happy to show you the ropes, but is late for drinks with friends. And that character description resonated across all of the different voiceover sections. And it was especially helpful, that second point there, to have Susan in the room when we ran the VO session. So especially if you're working in a larger organization, it's difficult to run VO. Everybody knows this. It's especially difficult to run VO if you are the endpoint for decisions in terms of how things will be affected across all of the stakeholders of a project, including executive leadership, people who don't necessarily have the closeness to audio that you have and might have entirely different ideas of how the character works. So I liked having Susan there in particular because she not only related to our voice actress DB, in a way that was much more direct. But she was able to have that kind of higher level knowledge of what people were expecting at all levels of the organization to come out of this session. So definitely get a second set of ears on that session if you can. It'll make things run much smoother. And that last point there, we covered a little bit, just creating a concise script side for talent. That's just the lines that the talent needs. I believe I included some kind of cutesy stage direction and world building in there. They don't need any of that. Just give them the lines. If you can find a template for a script thing with all the lines kind of narrow in the center, it makes it look a lot cooler. In terms of voiceover direction and editing, we talked about running the session with another stakeholder. Editing was a process. I would recommend learning the ultimate implementation naming convention being used by the engineers as early as possible. For us, it was something like 09_EN_VO_ line description or something. Having all of those come out of the DAW, I got real good with the shortcut, Shift-N, copy, paste, bounce, because we had 3-line reads of every single one of the 60 lines, including a bunch of wilds and outtakes that were never ultimately used. We decided that we would not put the voice in positional space because, again, it is kind of a intergalactic robot that is speaking inside your head, so that necessitated a little bit of a pipeline for the effects chain. That was, again, ENA GRM evolution to provide that kind of reverb effect, as well as an absinthe instance that had a delay line, and your standard compression and EQ. And this was applied in various ways across all 16 languages, including Thai, Japanese, German, French, Spanish, Iberian Spanish, traditional Chinese, simplified Chinese, etc. I don't really know how it all worked. I just knew that I blacked out, and 2 weeks later, we had 60 lines in 16 different languages. So I think setting up the signal chain early on, saving it if you're a Logic user, I don't know how it works in other DAWs, but just getting a reproducible flow for processing these lines. There's many terms of art in the dialogue editing world that you'll come into contact with, and as a UX sound designer will be expected to create that narrative design that really holds the user's hand throughout the experience. And advance. Finally, environmental design. So at Creative Labs, we're working under our art director, Vic, and our lead 3D designer for environments, Blake, as well as their counterparts, Joseph and Victor in Taipei. Vic created an environmental design Bible, something to refer back to. In addition to having those early ideas on the pre-production side, once you get into production, this is kind of like a dead zone for a lot of sound designers where things aren't quite ready to be implemented yet, but you're not in the post-production, so you can't necessarily spin up a lot of assets without a reference. This is a great chance to get geometry as early as possible. In the case of Creative Labs, we were working with 2 version control. The artists were working with Plastic, which is a kind of Unity integrated, much more friendly repo solution. Our engineers in Taipei at 2 Bears that were building the thing were working with Git. I'm comfortable with both, so being able to negotiate that on the artist side. And in the very early goings, don't tell IT, but getting things on SneakerNet just through USB drives, getting the geometry as early as possible, because the process of environmental art, the gray boxing, the laying out of the basic metrical geometry of the space, it doesn't change really throughout the process. They establish that stuff fairly early on. So getting that married with a little imagination and keeping up with the concept art, you can start dividing that environmental sound designer part from yourself as you continue working on the audio integration or the UX sound design across wires, all that stuff. And in particular, when you're looking at your spatial audio budget and custom tools. Like I talked about, we kind of implemented some middleware-like features to create the kind of gestalt of origin, but some of the user experience concerns are also engineering concerns. So for example, we created an asynchronous loading solution. When you load into origin ordinarily, you go into the pod right there. There's the option to open the door, and there's a trigger volume that you go through. If you choose not to go out of that trigger volume, sounds don't play. They're not even loaded for the environment. So that's a way that we could use the Unity engine and the Unity API to extend our environmental sound emitters to create a really smooth user experience that didn't have a huge memory footprint and didn't ultimately turn users off from using the software in the first place. And then, of course, version control, profiling, and being subject to critique. These are things that you'll learn as you develop more for many projects in VR. It's kind of inescapable that you'll be using tools like Unity in a common repo. So getting familiar with things like Plastic, it's becoming much more widespread, or Perforce, Git. You don't have to use Git Bash. You can also get source tree. There's a lot of different strategies you can take to kind of sandbox your audio changes and make sure that the thing that you designed, the thing that you prototype, and the thing that you tested relentlessly is what the user ends up seeing. And that goes on to profiling aggressively and profiling deeply. By doing that, early on we were able to identify a bug with the spatial audio solution we were using and the version of Unity that we were using, where if we instantiate an audio source and play it again, Unity had a way of completely reinitializing all the spatial data structures that made the CPU spike like crazy. And if you looked at a fairly superficial level on the profile, you wouldn't understand why that was. But I wanted spatial audio, and so by profiling deeply and finding the exact process that's responsible for the CPU spike, you could preserve the intent of your spatial sound design, identify the problem, and look to ways to fix it. In this case, contacting Unity before anyone decides to do something like, again, our line engineer back in the 2015s and axing all the audio because it's not performant. So bringing it all together, what are the three things we can look at in terms of strategies for UX sound design? I'm going to propose this three-prong heuristic with names that are chosen more or less arbitrarily, but the idea is basically that you're getting farther away from your comfort zone in each level. In terms of impact, that has to be there. It is more than classical sound design, but of course, it is not less. This is the work that you do in the DAW. This is your ability to reflect the brand identity and the timbre of your sounds. This is you deciding what's recorded, what's periodic or noise-based, what's representational, what's fantastical. All of these have to be in place before you begin approaching human-centered design. Persistence is a word that is similar to presence, and this is the next level, and it's actually what we spent a lot of the conference talking about, that basic agreement between what you see and hear in VR. That's having all of your spatial audio coherent, deciding when spatial audio is not important in a user experience context, when things need to be front and center, of course. Mono, as we know, is the best seat in the house. In a lot of cases, the most important thing that you have in your UI has the least amount of advanced spatial processing. But also getting your real-time effects and transitions ready, that first level of basic implementation where you're able to identify what causes processor spikes and things that are costly, and negotiating between how you communicate that out to engineering. And then this last part, texture, that's just the reproducible elements of the UX for the product. Really just that feel that we talked about right at the beginning, that idea that you are making the audio consistent across the experience and really taking ownership of everything that feeds into that. To me, this is best achieved as an architect of your scripting pipeline and understanding how it works. It is less effort, in my opinion, to get started on the basics of how things work in Blueprint or things work in Hammer or things work in C# than it is to relentlessly document everything. If you're working in a team where you have a PM that is audio literate, that's something they can help you with. Certainly UX designers have a kind of inverse flow in terms of their level of effort on a project. So if you want to work with somebody to help you document things, and if you're really lucky, you have people that are dedicated testers, but of course, in our new distributed economy, who knows? So one last video I want to show, and that is really just kind of those areas of texture in Origin. This is the things that are beyond the scope of the UI, things like interactions with the Vista launcher that I talked about that is much more impactful classical UX sound design, or rather just sound design. Things like the marker, which you can write with. We coded in RTPCs based on the event system to make it really performant. Interactions with the radio, which I engineered to behave exactly like a radio does. We had an early prototype from our creative technologist, Corey, that relied on Steam VR behaviors. We used that to optimize based on quaternion rotation, how the knobs themselves worked, also the UI visualizer and all the rest of it. And that just gave an opportunity for me to play more music and add more humanity to the experience. And then lastly, something no VR experience would be complete without, throwing stuff into other stuff. We created a enumeration for the size of objects, throwing into the tide pool. You'll see one of the larger ones, the beach ball, thrown into the water, and the subsequent splash that creates.
Now that you've learned the basics, go ahead and explore Origin. To move beyond your play area, push the joystick forward to teleport. You've just learned how to teleport. There's more to discover here, so look around. This is the Vista launcher. You can use it to change the background of Origin. You've discovered the marker.
Okay, so one last thing I want to say before we wrap, and if you take nothing else away from this presentation, I hope that it's this. You've probably heard a lot of names over the course of me talking, and these are not just Creative Lab staffers, these are my people. Take care of your people. They're the first and last humans you should think about in human-centric design, the ones you see 8 hours every day making this thing real. To relay a quick anecdote by way of conclusion, after we had finished most of Lens, I was working the last night until 4 a.m. fixing various bugs that had come up in the penultimate commit. Don't do this, by the way. Having to leave the next morning to go to Canada to visit my wife, who was house-sitting north of Whistler in Squamish-Lewitt. After getting off the Peter Pan bus line for the second leg of the journey, delirious because there's only so much Tim Hortons you can consume in an hour, I checked my work phone and saw that one of my colleagues, Wade, had documented every change, every crazy modification I had just made into a piece of documentation. And sitting on the bus with my double-double and my sour cream glaze, I cried like a baby looking at a work phone because I knew he had done that so nobody else, not me, not anyone, had to go through that terrible experience of a crazy late-night commit for sound. So in the end, for human-centric design, take care of your people. They will take care of you. And that's how you achieve UX sound across realities. Thank you. Thank you very much. It looks like we're a little bit close to time. I'll be in the AVAR lobby after this at 4. I didn't talk really very much about the specifics of sound design, a lot of the wavetable synthesis that went into the actual UI design, some of the optimization that we did on the back end. More than happy to talk about that stuff as well as getting started in UX sound after Tom's presentation.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, in the interest of time, we should probably just blaze on to our last workshop, right, Sally?
That is correct. We just need a couple of minutes to reset the room and get the slides in order, and then we'll kick Tom off for the final presentation of the conference.
And again, I'm sure Andrew, I'm not sure, but I imagine, Andrew, you'll be around for our 4 o'clock open chat in the AVAR lobby. So he says he will. So
I'm mashing this affirmative emoji as hard as I can.
Awesome. Thanks.
I'm going to briefly towel off.
Fantastic talk.
Looks like you're all set.
So we don't see Tom in the second room, so maybe he's not on here.
Absolutely. I saw a change. And now it's back. Okay. And you've set yourself to amplify your voice and to go on air? Yes? Can someone in the room give us an emoji? Okay. We
There
want
he
to turn
is.
those frowns upside down. Good. Okay. All right. Well, I'll kick you off now. Okay, everyone. For the final presentation in this session, we have Tom Ammermann from New Audio Technology, who will be presenting about how to create extraordinary binaural audio in digital audio workstations for headlock, score, music, and also how to use binaural real-time rendering tools, which will be illuminating and delightful. I'll hand it over to you, and at the end of the session, we'll all reconvene over in the lobby, and thank you so much, everyone. Let's shower Tom with some emojis.
Thanks a lot. Right, so I'm very proud to be here in the AVR 2020. The first time for me in the AVI AR, because mostly it's in well, time-wise, it's also it's still in the on the west coast of the US, and it is always a long journey for me to travel to that. But anyway, so I'm very happy to be in here, and I'm very excited about this virtual experience, and I enjoyed it very much. And just up front, so I have some internet issues here tonight, so it's 12 o'clock in the night, and if you see me and nothing happens, so my internet connection stops, and then I have to switch to my phone. I check that it works also well. All right, so let me switch. Is the slide moving? Yeah, perfect. So creation and reproduction of high quality binaural audio for VR applications. This is what I want to talk about this evening, and well, now, and I hopefully will have only good news for you, but the bad news is this talk, well, maybe for some of you, I hope you didn't expect something else. I'm not a scientist, so I'm coming from the production side of the business. So I started as a musician. I didn't learn something serious, and became to be a music producer, and started 2 decades ago creating surround sound, and also creating my first binaural mixes. At the time I used 2M6000 from TC because they had a great 3D, surround reverb at that time, and they had a very, very good binaural processing, and then everything was real time. So I could mix under the headphone a binaural, I could do a binaural mix, so not as 541 mix, who at the time should finally be a binaural mix, but mixing binaural, so using a lot more advantages, as I will show you in a couple of slides. Then I did some mixes in 3D for Sony Music, and I saw we urgently need new tools, because at that time in 2008 and 9, nothing was on the market we could use for creating at that time 9.1. So we started with Auro 3D at that time, and so we need urgently something. And I started to develop software, and since that time we have some tool. We developed some tools I will show later. And by the way, we also will listen to a lot of stuff. Yeah, after I found the new audio technology, recently I got a Grammy nomination, and we will listen to that a little bit later, and in binaural, and I will show you a little bit how I worked on that, to give you an idea of one approach, my approach. I know a lot of people do it very different, but this is my approach, and this is also the aim of this presentation. I'd like to give you some inspirations, some ideas, maybe to think about how to create something different, and also give you a little bit insight in my point of view from a music producer regarding binaural audio and spatial audio. So here are some references I was involved in, that the picture of my background is complete. I was very involved in a lot of well-known film classics, and every of these references you can see here. Can you see it? Yeah. Every of these experiences, these productions you can see here, I was involved for the German releases, and I did a lot of extra mixings and up mixings and masterings, encodings, decodings, as well as each of them got a binaural track, an extra track on the Blu-ray or the DVD. You can select if you do not have a 5.1 system you can use, or in nighttime, or if you're on the go, or whatever. So VR needs binaural audio because standard stereo disturbs the spatial experience of reality. This is something I like to notice here, or to say here. I would say we urgently need to use VR for Binaural audio for VR, because it doesn't make sense to have 2D or 1D audio. Stereo is 1D, not 2D, and 3D visual experiences. What am I talking about when I mean high quality? So I'm not really talking about bandwidth or kilobytes per second or sample rate or something like that. I'm just talking about format like ambisonic, first order ambisonic, and what is the main delivery format or used format in VR as well as in 360, of course. And I want to compare it to all what I will show today is based on the approach to working with channel-based and object-based production workflows and approaches. And it's very tricky. And I'm sitting in front of the screen and do a lot of gestures, and then, oh, you can't see this. So normally, if I do a presentation, I'm running around here and do a lot of gestures. So I have to learn to work or to deal with this interesting new situation. But again, I appreciate the possibility to do this presentation this crazy times here on the AVR 2020. So I like to show my ideas or give my inspirations with a music example, and my idea, or giving you some thoughts from of mine regarding music production for VR. Commonly, music is used in VR experiences, and VR always means it's a game engine involved. There's a game engine involved, and the first four of these bullet points referring to a binaural processing done by the game engine. The first one is the first approach is using ambisonic lower, so low order ambisonic, because going over third order is very difficult and needs a lot of CPU consumption, and it's not easy to create, and it's not really very common. The most tools you can get in the market for creating ambisonics working up to one, so maybe second order. And the next step is placing, or the next possibility is placing the instruments you want to hear in that VR experience around you. So you have a bass drum, snare, hi-hat, a singer, a drummer, a keyboard player, and you place them in the environment of the game engine, and the game engine is doing the binaural audio processing depending on the movements you do. This is also a very good approach. And another possibility is placing a multi-channel mix around you. So not putting the audio objects around you, but creating first a mix to, let's say, 5.1, and decide where you think, or where your front position or front view position is, and placing accordingly these 5.1 mix. And a cheap version, but also possible also done a lot, is creating a standard stereo mix in your audio workstation, and then placing this also as audio objects in the game engine in front of you, so to the left and the right side. So the fifth method, unfortunately the most used method working with music in the game, is doing just stereo. So doesn't include any binaural processing, also not from the game engine, what is, from my point of view, not a very good idea. But now, music supports the storytelling to create an emotional experience. It does not depend to visual cues. This is something I like to post here, and this means it is. So the question what comes up then: should the music be hat-tricked? And I wouldn't say no, because if you see or if you experience a movement from something you will not see, because you don't see the instruments mostly. If it is a standard VR experience, not a group of musicians around you, then it's more irritating to experience that the singer in front of you moves to the left because you look to the right. So the task on the task of music is more it should guide you emotionally, not spatially. So it is not necessary to put the music also room locked. So now I say the opposite of what I said before. It's not a good idea to play stereo directly to the headphones, so to the ears. Now I say, well, lock the music to the head, and lock of course the objects should be room locked. So if you move your head, the audio object must move the same, not the same way, but accordingly, and use these advantage and do it. Or here's an introduction of a sixth step, and this is create high quality binaural music mixes where the binaural virtualization is already in the mix, so not made by the game engine. So this is you can use the advantage of mixing in a DAW, not need depending to fancy tools where you have to deal with a new workflow to create spatial audio, where you cannot use all your favorite tools you used to work with in an audio workstation. So you can just run with your audio workstation. So independent, if you have Pro Tools, Logic, Nuendo, Cubase, or Ableton, you can do the mix, the binaural version in your workstation. You can decide by yourself to the best binaural rendering unit you find in the market. Of course, I recommend our technology I will show on the next slide. And keep in mind that a voice, drum, so a drum kit and keyboards and bass, all of that is still stereo or mono. So you can use all your favorite voodoo tools you use for enhancing the sound of an object. You can use all that as you normally use it in an audio workstation. You need a panning tool, of course. Some audio workstations has the ability to do immersive mixes, some better, some not as good, but and a lot of workstations, and mainly the stereo workstations, who are focused on standard stereo production, do not have any possibility to do immersive audio. But with this plugin, the Spatial Audio Designer, you can also create binaural audio and spatial audio, so also for a real speaker environment, with this plugin. So the plugin is works in all the well-known interfaces on both platforms, and it works, as I mentioned, in stereo workstations pretty much good. I'll show you how in the video a little bit later. It is a 100% object-based approach, and it follows. This is very important as a music producer. It follows professional production workflows. What I mean here is, the more you work with that tool, you get you see, hey, it works like I expected. So it's not learning everything again, but following professional workflows, and this is pretty helpful. So it's not a large learning curve. And finally, the Spatial Audio Designer offers not only I'm moving the mouse here on the screen, but you can't see it. I'm sorry. You can see you have a panning tool. You can manage the audio sources, and you have a binaural processing. This binaural processing origins from real measurement. So I say we measure and but I don't say how we measure and how we do the processing. This is of course our kung fu. And but the advantage using a good measured room is it sounds more natural. So if you do a good measurement, you also capture the imperfectness of these environments, and this is where your brain says, is it real? Is it not real? And this is all captured by the measurement and the processing method we use, and it also gives you the possibility to create a mix for a real speaker system. It doesn't help you if you have HRTFs was made in an anechoic chamber without speaker coloration, because finally your mix shall work on a real speaker system in the real world. So it helps a lot to have a binaural processing what works like a speaker system in an imperfect room in the imperfect real world. And this is the approach where we come from, and it bears a lot of new advantages, and I show you some. I think it's the next slide. No, give me just the next slide is the video, but I'd like to give you here a short introduction how the spatial audio designer worked. It is here was there is a okay, now maybe I can move a little bit like that. So this is it consists of 3 modules you can see here. It's so-called plugin suite. These are the send modules. The send modules always are inserted in the object tracks, so your bass drum, snare, vocals, guitars, and so on. You only see the object in the panning grid here of this track. You have a mix module. What sums are the send modules, where you see all your objects together in a grid, so you know everything, you have a good overview. This is always placed in a stereo strip because it is delivering the binaural processing. And this is the reason why it is always placed in a stereo strip. And finally, we will also see this in the second video. We have a so-called channel out module. This is placed, you can or you should use, depending on how many outputs you need, for example 10 outputs for a 9.1 mix. You insert it in output tracks of your DAW, and then for example here I use stereo channel out modules. I can allocate the channels of my, let's say, 9.1 mix step by step through these channel out modules and connect these tracks here to my real speaker system. And so this is the reason why it works in standard why it works in standard stereo audio workstations. All right, and I forgot to mention this here. The virtual buses, this is how we name the rendering engine behind this plugin suite. It is running in the background, so the audio workstation do not know anything about it, but it works anyway in the plugin domain. That means we have no latency. So input output is 0 latency, and of course, in the channel out modules, you do not hear the binaural processing. So binaural processing is only available in the output of the mix module. Okay, this is a very brief overview of this plugin suite. And now the next slide is a short video where I give you an insight how I did the mixes for Kraftwerk. Where we got the Grammy. We got a Grammy for Best Electric Dance Album, and we got a second nomination for Best Immersive Audio Mix. No, it was Best Surround Mix at that time. Now the category is Best Immersive Audio Mix, and well, yeah. So we can. I'm pretty sure this session will not be an hour, so we will have a lot of time. We can do a Q&A if the session is over. Okay, now I switch to the next slide. Is it starting? Oh no, why not? This is the next one. Okay, now we jump over to the fun part. Just up front, sorry if you hear the fan of my laptop a little bit loud, but we have very high temperature here in Hamburg. So what you see here is the Kraftwerk 3D mix. You can see here we produced everything again, mixed by Fritz Hilbert from Kraftwerk, again in Dolby Atmos. And Dolby Atmos, these Dolby Atmos mixes are the base of the binaural processing I did here, or the binaural mixes. I'll show you in a couple of minutes. And here you see all the objects and the bad channels, and here the automation and so on. And here you can see we really mixed everything again. And but it's a lot of work to do a binaural mix for every of these tracks. So we decided to start from the Dolby Atmos mixes Fritz Hilbert from Kraftwerk did. And now I'd like to show you, as I showed before, how I did the routing here with the send modules and the mix module. Here are the sources. In the sources you can see the send modules here, and as you can see, the send modules. And now the trick here, I should unmute this here. The trick here is it's just an inspiration how to do it. So it's not the only rule to do that. It's just my, this is my way to do it 5 years ago. So as I did it in 2015. And I still use this technique. I use more than one binaural processing, so binaural room processing, to create a mix who sounds pretty tight, as a electropop mix should be, but also has speciality. And I also like a lot of bass or low end, and my personal experience is the low end is pretty important to create a natural and nice sounding room experience. And what I'm doing here is I use 3 mix modules, as you can see here. The first one is I use for the bed. I use a very small 7.1 mix here. I use the Luna Studio 4, what is my old studio, what sounds pretty tight but spatial enough that you have a great spatial impression. My personal opinion, of course, you may use something another location. It's up to you how you want to do that. The next one is a 40.1 measurement I did in the Post Republic. It's a Dolby Atmos mixing stage in Berlin. Let me open here the panning tool, and as you used to see, this is a standard allocation for a Dolby Atmos mixing stage with a ceiling rows and the side rows here. And finally, and this is, I use this binaural processing for the objects, because this mixing stage is a little bit larger as my old studio, so the spatial impression is much more intensive or obvious as the tight bad mix in the Luna Studio 4. And finally, I use this is just 5.1, and this is another location where I know the bass sounds warm and large. So this is just an artistical decision. It's not a technical decision. And you notice it is 5.1 here, and it's 42.1 here, and it's 7.1 here. But it doesn't matter, because finally we listen to the 2-channel binaural output from the mix module here. And as you can see here, I finally sum these 3 binaural processings to 1 here as input. And this is the bus where I do the mastering and the monitoring and so on. And I also do a little bit mastering here to make the whole experience of this mix as compact as a standard stereo mix. This is very important if you do music productions. It needs to be or needs to have the same, let's say, impact like a stereo mix. If it is not like that, you always lose a competition against the stereo version, and the clients always want to listen to the stereo version. Okay, now I will start to play a little bit, give you 2 or 3 minutes, and then I will switch on off these channels here, and we look into the panning a little bit to give you a little bit insight of what happens here. First, as you can see, now we hear nothing. This is just the bed, and these are just the objects. And these are just the low end. I just use the LFE signal here from the bed. Let me mute it again, add these both here, and now I just add the bass without. With. Just the objects. And just the bed again. All together. Okay, this is just a short introduction how you could do this. So it's not a rule again, and I use the Spatial Audio Designer. Of course, it's our tool, and I know all the advantages I showed you on the slide on the slides before. And so this is my way to my current way, not my future way, but my current way to create high quality, or what I named high quality binaural music mixes for VR and also for 360 applications. So now let's move forward in the slides. All right. So okay. Okay, some fans. Okay, me too. So as we started with the production, honestly, I knew some songs of Crawford, but then we started with the production, and I would say every second song, as I said, I know that song, but I didn't know it is from Kraftwerk, or I heard something similar, what is a new song, what sounds like one song, a song or a song idea from Kraftwerk. So I was really excited to hear all these great songs they did, and I'm very now I'm a real fan of Kraftwerk. All right. So the second task I want to talk about here is reproduction. So giving another idea to work with immersive audio. Let me move a little bit like here. Work with immersive audio in a VR in VR. It is based on a computer application. So this doesn't work currently. In the future it will change, but currently on a mobile phone. And here's the idea: to use a 5-for-1 output from a VR experience, so a game engine, do a binaural processing. I'm sorry, I'm just directing my mouse to it, but you can't see it. I have to grab the so starting with a 5-for-1 output of your VR experiences, create a binaural processing and just play it out on the sound card of your computer. And this here I'd like to introduce another product from us. This is a spatial sound card. It's a standalone application what works on Mac and Windows, and it becomes to be the standard audio device of your computer. So up from then, everything what happens on your computer or what sounds on your computer, so could be a game or a VR experience, Netflix, players. It is let's say inserted or placed in front of your real sound card. It becomes to be the standard audio device, and like that you can play everything at the same time if you want through this virtual speaker system, what you can see here, and enjoy it just with your regular headphones. So you don't need any extra headphone here to you can enjoy your content. Let me say something here to HRTFs. Of course, personalized works better. And I don't know if most of you or every of you check these Smith Audio. This is, or Smith, I don't know how to pronounce it, but this is hardware, a very expensive hardware, and that works crazy good. But, well, if you, it is, you do your own HRTFs, you have to measure them with microphones in your ears and so on. And it works absolutely fantastic. So if you hear the virtualization and then put the headphone away and listen to the real speaker, it is not easy to say which, is it the same, is it different or not different. It sounds very convincing. But if you disable the head tracking and move out of the room, so don't see the speakers again and don't see the room you heard before, 50% of the convincing is away. And we use generic measurements, so generic HRTS. But we give you a lot of parameters to edit these HRTFs, and one parameter is giving you different virtual speaker systems. So some of you may love one speaker system for games or creating music, doing music production, and love another virtual speaker system to watch movies or something like that. We, as you can see here, it's the preset Dubai. We decided not, because listening, also binaural listening and spatial listening, is a very individual thing, and everybody expects something different, and or different room reflections and so on. So because of that, we decided to name this, and we do this just in the consumer version, not in the professional version. The professional version there you can see the photos of the studios we measured. But in the consumer version, we decided to name these binaural processing, so this we call them locations. We name it as not as pop 1 or rock 2 or movie or game or whatever, because then you do a pre-decision for the listener who may would use something else for games or movies. So we try to keep it open. If some of you like to listen your music in New York and watching movies in Shanghai and playing games in Tokyo. So this is the way where we go here, and this is very successful. So in the beginning we got some questions, what does it mean? But that stopped because people understand it is my decision where I want to enjoy rich content. And again here we also use these real measured rooms, and our studios are here. This is a cinema, and this is a mixing stage. It's an audio mixing stage. This is my Luna studio. Looks more like a lab, right? And as you can see here, I did their immersive audio, and this is a studio in the SAE in Hamburg with a 501 speaker system. So now let's watch just a 5-minute video, and then I'm close to ready, and then we have about 40 minutes, so we have a lot of time for Q&A. Okay, now I'd like to show you just very briefly how the spatial sound card works, and what is my idea, what I want to show you here, what is my inspiration here to work with spatial audio and VR experience. So the application is, I have a VR experience, don't want to care about the binaural audio and the audio workstation or so on, just working with audio objects in my VR experience, and selecting in the game engine 541 or 7.1 output, and of course the game engine is interactively doing all the panning for you. And then you play out this 541 mix, let's say 541, to the spatial sound card. The spatial sound card is a standalone application what runs as a standard audio device of your computer. So if the spatial sound card is open and you open your VR experience, it automatically is connected to the spatial sound card here. It is, in this case, a 5.1 virtual loudspeaker system. Why do I use Pro Tools here? I just want to show you how it works or how it sounds. If the spatial sound card gets a standard 5.1 mix from any source, in this case I use Pro Tools to give you a little bit the experience of how it could sound if you use a VR experience or your VR production in such a spatial sound card application. So giving you a short overview here, what happens here, it is you have all the sources here in Pro Tools. Sorry if you hear any noises here, but well, as always, it shouldn't happen, but it definitely happened. Under my flat there is a lot of construction work, so well, but hopefully you not care too much about it. Here are the sources. I still use send modules to bring it into a mix module, and here I introduce the module I mentioned in the slide before. It is a channel out module. Here you have the output of the discrete mix channels, of course, without binaural processing. And this output is directed to a 501 bus and Pro Tools is connected directly to the speaker inputs here of the spatial sound card. What we have here is a very short live recording from Thomas Blug. It's a very famous guitar player in Germany who plays Little Wing. And we just hear a little bit in it, and then I will also mute and solo these virtual loudspeakers. So let's go. So now I go over and solo the center channel, left front, left surround, right surround, right front, LFE, just a little bit LFE here. So this is pretty much it. So it's a 501 mix. We listen on a virtual loudspeaker system. Let me show you how it will sound if you move a source through like a game would do in your VR experience. I solo the input, the left channel input to my 501 mix here. And I move the source here. Back to the front. Without processing, just stereo. So no binaural processing included here, involved. Switch back again. So that's pretty much it. So I use a 501 source here, play it back on a 501 speaker system, what is running as a standard audio device on your computer, and have fun. That's it. All right, so if you're interested in checking it out, we have, there's a pointer again. So we have a trial version for both platforms. And this is a new version 2.5, what has, for example, also a very good 7.1 routing, because, well, I don't know if you experience it, but on your computer, very often 7.1 mixes, if you get a 7.1 mix, what is not easy. So there's a lot of marketing, hey, 7.1, surround, 3D, blah, 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 blah. But finally, if you play it back, it's there. And but if you really get a source where you have a 8-channel or 6-channel track inside, then you can play it back on the speaker system. Yeah, okay. I think now I'm good. And this is our website. And thank you very much. Thank you. So, yeah.
I think we're going to open it up to Q&A.
Yes, please.
See the raise your hand button.
We can't hear you in the second room, moderator.
Can you hear me? Can it?
Yeah,
Lawrence,
we can hear you fine.
Okay. So now we opened the Q&A round, and I don't know. Can in both rooms can somebody? I only see this room, right? So I can't see if somebody raises hands in another room, right?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Just barely. I think I'm hearing you through somebody else's mic. Is it Megan moderating?
Yeah,
Are you on air?
it's Megan. So I am amplified and on air. So
well,
if you'd like
we can hear you. It's just super cool. Or at least I'm speaking for myself. I don't know, but it's okay. Maybe Tom can just repeat the question or whatever.
No problem. Whoever is ready for a question, I should have hand raises open.
Somebody raise his hand? Oh, funny.
I actually had a question.
Yeah.
So what inspired you to kind of dive into, working with this and building this specific plugin?
As mentioned in the second slide, I think, I saw we really need tools to create immersive audio. At that time, I had in mind also to create a binaural audio because, as I mentioned as well, I started in 2000 with creating binaural mixes for music, and so especially binaural mixes, not 501 mixes who are played back in 501 binaural. And this is the reason why I stepped in, because my production for Sony, I did this with a lot of auxiliaries and do automations to move an object, let's say in the height layer, and that is wastes a lot of time. So this is the reason why we started to create this plugin suite and the spatial audio designer and the spatial sound card. This idea comes up from a client from us who drives a Blu-ray company. So they have a lot of people and technicians and designers who sit in one room, so in an open office, but mostly, so almost everybody of them has to check or to mix or to do something with the audio, what is mostly 541. So, and of course they had an surround studio, but it is of course always occupied. So you need to have a possibility to check your 541 mix if on your place, so on your computer in the open office. So they decided to acquire a bunch of licenses, and they are very, very happy with them. And now there is one of the main market is for this application, of course, games. Gamers love this application, as well as music companies and video studios and Blu-ray studios who has to deal the whole day with spatial audio, mostly with 541, and need something to monitor it. Does it answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, good. You're welcome.
I am not seeing any other hands specifically, so hopefully everyone can, if they have any questions, they can ask. Oh, wait, I just got a couple, just a sec. David, could you ask your question?
Hi.
Yes, you did.
In the Kraftwerk mix, I noticed you made a distinction between a bed like submix and objects. I wasn't familiar with that. Can you talk about that?
You're not familiar with that?
Right.
Okay. I'm talking about bed mix, so I always pronounce it a little bit bad, but I mean bed. So it is. This is a strategy creating Dolby Atmos mixes. Dolby Atmos works with a hybrid solution. They work with channel based. They call it the bed. It's 712. So they have a 7.1 standard 7.1 mix and added 2 high channels. This is the bed, and they work with objects additionally. And this bed mix is always allocated to the speaker system of a Dolby environment. Dolby environment is specified, and the objects are always free. So you may remember to this picture of these 43.1 from the studio in Berlin. You saw these so many speakers, the speakers at the row in the middle rows and the side rows. This is the approach from Dolby for cinemas. The cinemas are not same size, Some has more speakers, some has less, and they work with objects for this to pinpoint just one object to one speaker. And this is a great advantage. I saw this the first time in a cinema with Gravity, where George Clooney is flying around you and still talking. You don't hear him, and he is at the beginning. You see him in the middle of the screen, and he moves out on the left side. He's still talking into the radio. And Sandra Bullock in the middle of the screen stays in the middle of the screen, is talking, and you hear him the whole time, and that was a great experience. Is it a good answer for you? It's okay?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, you're welcome.
Awesome. And here is Jessica.
Hello. Hi.
Hey. Hey.
My name is Jessica. I'm a live sound engineer and tour and production manager. And just want to thank you so much for being here and sharing your knowledge and experience. My question is, are you starting to see more crossover as the live music industry is desperately searching for some kind of solution to the current situation with trying get fans back in concert experiences? And do you see your technology being able to help?
Absolutely. Sorry, your audio is was a little bit interrupted, but as far as I understood, the question is what is about live and maybe also installation audio, and the answer is pretty clear. Yes, we have an application for that. So we have a rendering box. It's hardware where you can feed a lot of audio objects in, and you can move them at any place in the room to any given loudspeaker system. It is, for example, very often used in planetariums who has more than 5.1. We have some in Germany, and we equip them, and they work with this processor, and the input is totally different. It is live input, it is output of the Digistar. This is a show system for a planetarium, as well as your DAW output and some Blu-rays and blah blah blah, whatever, and you have all these inputs and you put it exactly to that place where you want to have it, or you move it. You can do automations and render to your speaker system. This is also a big advantage of working with objects. So it doesn't matter how the domes are sized or where the speakers are, and this is similar with live events. If you work with objects, and this is also the approach from Dolby with this objects approach, or part of their approach, render it to the speaker, to the given speaker system. And the live event companies develop more and more the strategy to work with, not with just two huge speaker systems on the left and the right side, where everybody in front of the speaker system die, and everybody in the back row and nobody in the back row hears something, and they cluster the speaker arrays and put them more in larger clusters with less speakers at one point. And because of that, they need tools like this live processor. Of course, everything is real-time at that processing unit, to work with the audio objects in the mix for a live event in a theater, on a cruise liner, on Expo 2020, for example, where the plugin is used to create mixes for the Expo 2020, and the guys who do the music production for the Expo in the Mobility Pavilion, it's a German company from Hamburg. They use the binaural audio processing to create mixes for 13 different stations, where every of them is out of any format and has totally different speaker amount and locations. So yes, the answer to your question is finally yes, we still arrived. It is possible. And by the way, the plugin is of course supporting your whole work in the audio workstation, in the processing, in this processor. We named the processor Special Audio Designer Processor. Pretty easy, and you can create your stuff in your audio workstation at home. Can move over to a planetarium with 60 speakers, directly connected, tune it, and export is 60.1 master for the dome, and leave the dome, and send the invoice. And but you could also deliver or offer an object-based master to the dome, what helps also, but depends on what the request is. So is it a good answer, or do you need something more?
No, that's very helpful. Thank you. I'm trying to figure out solutions to get live music in our.
Sorry, your connection is very bad, so I not really understand you. Could you repeat it?
I'm trying to figure out how to help the live concert industry get into VR space. So, yeah.
Please repeat it. So how to bring live into VR?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me give you one example, and maybe this hit your question a little bit. We installed such a processor in the planetarium in Hamburg, They have a huge speaker system, and then they had a 90 anniversary show. They did this presentation in the dome, unfortunately without audience because Corona, but they did it virtually. And they used the binaural, of course the processor includes the binaural processing as well. They streamed the whole show in binaural audio. And well, if there would be an audience in the dome, they could along that also deliver everything on the speaker system on the dome. So maybe this is something what goes a little bit more in your direction. If this not really fits to your question, maybe you can you have an idea what you mean with supporting live with VR. Okay, yeah.
I'll check with you in the lobby after. Thank you
Okay,
so
yeah,
much.
we checked it in the lobby. Okay, great.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so I have no idea how to.
So we do have one more question. We might kind of spill over a little bit here, but Wolf, if you could ask your question.
Hey, sorry, yeah, that was supposed to be Jacob. I came up with my username too.
Oh yeah, no problem, not a big deal.
Yeah.
Hi, Jacob.
So I was curious when you talked about Dolby Atmos being an object-based format. I was looking at it the other day and I saw that they kind of displayed it as a person as the concentric point in the middle of a sphere. So I always thought it used ambisonics, but you said it was an object-based format that used beds as well.
Sorry, Dolby Atmos. Could you repeat Dolby Atmos and you thought ambisonic is included or involved in Dolby Atmos?
Yeah, I thought that's was
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. So ambisonic is definitely not involved in. Well, ambisonic is not involved in Dolby Atmos. It's pretty straightforward, typically Dolby, and I love that approach. So creating a basic with using this bed approach. What is also familiar with all the 7.1 mixes, they don't have to extend their experience a lot. So staying just with 7.1 and 2 extra channels in the high. And then everybody who wants to do a little bit more can work with the objects on the whole system. But of course, you could use an ambisonic source. By the way, there's a lot of information around ambisonic who are not really right. So ambisonic is, for example, not equal binaural audio. This is something I heard sometimes here and other places. It's not the way that. And finally, it's also ambisonic has to go to channel base before you can listen to it on a real speaker system, on a virtual speaker system. My voice is not amplified. Oh, I'm sorry. Host tools. Oh, I'm sorry. My voice is not amplified. Thank you for reminding me about that. And it is so well. But to answer to your question, okay, we should go to the lobby. And Dolby Atmos, ambisonic is not involved in Dolby Atmos, but you can create from ambisonic, let's say a quad mix or 5.1 or whatever, and use these group of objects, you can say, in Dolby Atmos mixes. So, for example, if you did an ambient recording and you want to use it in a Dolby Atmos mix, you can do that. Just decode it to a channel-based mix, put the channels to the place where they should be, and move forward.
Awesome.
Right?
Well,
Okay, I see. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
The lobby is in fact open, so if you'd like
Great.
to hang around or ask more questions,
Yes, of course.
we'll see you there.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. This is Sally just saying thank you to everyone for coming along to all the presentations. There's definitely been a lot of interesting information shared, a lot of interesting technological experiences that we've had as well, navigating this AltSpace VR reality that we're hosting the AVAR in, and we'll see you all over in the lobby. do look out for, or if you want to email us, you can just send us like any feedback that you had on the experience of like having this conference in Old Space VR. We will send out an email with a survey at some point in the next couple of weeks once we've decompressed. But we would be really interested in hearing your feedback like directly about like how you found this experience and, you know, whether we should do this again or how we could make it better. So again, thank you everyone.
Thank you too. Click on the wrong button.